why don't we talk about the fund, right? The Innovation Fund, Jamstack Innovation Fund, I believe is the name, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
How is that? What's the process like? So let's say, for example, there is a company out there wants to apply. How do they get started with that? What's the process?
Absolutely. I mean, so first of all, like the Netlify's Jamstack Innovation Fund was born out of Netlify. We've been spearheading this decoupled movement, the Jamstack. This idea that we're decoupling the web layer from the business logic, right, for a while, and Netlify's role in that has always been supplying a viable workflow.
Right.
And so, if you take on this way of working, what you're doing is essentially you're breaking down a bunch of internal silos in your organization, and now the web layer can be made by groups that can sort of move from project to project and share workflows, which is super powerful. But that also means that when Netlify comes in as this common workflow layer, then it's all about how we embrace the ecosystem and how we empower the ecosystem to be used by these organizations. And so Matt and I have been angel investing for a while now in companies, not to diversify our income at all, right? Just small checks, right? But because we wanted to push that ecosystem forward, like Netlify is really dependent on it. We started betting on a market trend that didn't exist, right? So of course we're super interested in a healthy, mature, and vibrant ecosystem, and so. This was a chance for us to next level that, right? Where we have a plan of investing $10 million into Jamstack companies. And the way we do it is it's $100,000 investment. It's a part of a normal fundraise. We don't lead around or price it because that's not the point. We're not, again, out to diversify our income in any way, or finding new ways of making money for Netlify, or becoming a VC. The idea here is just how can we best empower the ecosystem, right? And how can we best work together? And so we come in there, but we attach a program to it. And that program has advisory parts to it. It has a lot of technical workshops as well, where we also work together and pair portfolio companies, but also with our other external partners. And I think that part is also incredibly important, because if you're looking at the modern web, then one of the megatrends is this explosion of the API economy, right? Yeah. And so before, when you both sat in a silo, right, where you were sort of, I'm using this system that also includes all the front end and the server environments and programming language and everything else, and so I'm only going to be working on the types of projects that system is made for. And so you might realistically be interfacing with 1 to 5 APIs. Now, if you're part of a web team, you can span across many different kinds of projects. And if you couple that to the explosion of the API economy, then you're really sort of subjected to working with hundreds of them, right? And so that's, of course, why we sort of invested in OneGraph, the most advanced technology in the world, for an API mesh layer. But the idea behind it is like, how can we not reinvent the wheel? How can we create a viable, solid workflow? And that includes the ecosystem also coming together and sort of agreeing to some extent on some certain ways of working together, right? And this fund also gives us a choice to be so much closer to the ecosystem and do that together with them. And I'm super excited about be doing it, right? I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us, and I love that we get to expose so many great startups to the 2.5 million developers that are on Netlify right now, you know? So hopefully it becomes a win-win-win.
Yeah, for sure. It does sound super exciting. And you mentioned something when you're talking there. You were sort of betting on a movement that didn't quite exist at the time. And one thing that's always fascinated me about Netlify is the link between Netlify and Jamstack and how that came about, and the fact that you guys pretty much made the movement, right? You sort of built the movement, you thought it up, and you put it out there. And you started the trend, right? So I want to know like how that started, right? So from what I can see, it started with Jamstack.org launching in like beginning of 2016. So what was there like discussion inside Netlify at the time that this will become a trend? You want it to become a trend? Were you seeing it happen without the sort of name? What was happening? And what was the objective at that point with Jamstack.org specifically?
Well, so Jamstack.org, the site is just a place for best practices of how to build for the modern web. The terminology itself came up already in the middle of 2014. And we came up with that because, again, what we saw was that the web was being attacked from all sides, right? And it wasn't performant or secure or scalable enough with the existing architecture of these big monoliths having to run, right? And we saw it with mobile apps coming in and also under threat from a lot of other kinds of walled gardens. And so we saw that it would just be in every single way a better way to build for the web if you can decouple the web layer from the business logic. But in essence, that's one thing is saying it. What are all the best practices that comes with that, right? That you can now be on an ADN, you have multiple points of origin because the origin server is taken out of the equation, and how do you use Git, and how do you think about frameworks and build tools, and there's a lot of things there that goes into it. And there wasn't a really good way of talking about this, right? And so we could chat with an agency that was essentially saying they were building on the Jamstack or trying to embrace those principles, but it was been like 15 years, sort of going 15 minutes, right, going through the description to us, right, on the phone. So I think what we felt was that this is a better way to build for the web. Netlify's role in this is to create a viable workflow, essentially to become a conduit of an upcoming ecosystem, right, and tie it all together. But we, as an ecosystem, would need a better way to talk about it. We had to make it into a thing, so to speak, right? And that's why we came up with the terminology. And I also think that's why it caught on, right? Because there were so many people seeing that this was a better way, but not having a great way of talking about it, right? And then if you see other traditional sort of abbreviations and stacks that have been out there, they often are sort of very company specific, and on purpose we didn't do that. It's JavaScript APIs and markup. It was we were not trying to control it in that way, right? We always wanted to talk about the ecosystem as one thing, and then Netlify stands on its own as how we help facilitate the use of it, right? But that's how it started, right?
Yeah.
And it started with a clear vision of wanting to build a better web, and wanting to have the web stay an open, free standard, right? Because so many people depend on it, right? And so it might be good for a single company that it's pigeonholed into something more proprietary, but it's not great for anyone else, right? And so I think that still stands as our primary mission today. We want to build a better web.
Okay. And for everybody who is listening, not watching, Jason has also joined us. Jason, how you doing?
Hello. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We just sort of got started chatting. I hit the record button and we got into it with Chris. And I was saying, and again, for people who are watching and not listening, I feel left out because I'm not wearing a hat. But next time I'll bring my hat. So I'm going to now flip back to some of the questions I had sort of pre-prepared now that everyone's in the room. So Jason, I was interested in your story because you were doing Learn with Jason, your web series, prior to joining Netlify. Can you tell me a bit about the web series? Did that help you get hired? Like, what's the story there?
I guess Chris can tell you whether or not it helped me get hired.
Maybe I'm asking the wrong person that question, actually. Yeah, you're right.
So Learn with Jason is something that was a very happy accident for me. So I was working at Gatsby at the time. And while I was there, I was trying to find ways to be more transparent. I just wanted more of what we were doing to be out in public. It's a phrase that I've now heard it called learn in public. I think at the time I was just thinking about transparency in general. And I was experimenting with different ways of sharing what was going on. And I was I didn't really run DevRel at Gatsby, but I kind of ran DevRel at Gatsby. We weren't structured enough to have like titles in that way. But part of my job was trying to meet with people in the community and help them learn, help them do more. And so I was experimenting with formats. So I started out trying to live stream meetings, and then that was a terrible idea. Nobody wants to watch a meeting, but then we would live stream me trying to build something for the Gatsby team. And those were better, but not super engaging. And then one day I called a friend and I was like, I'm trying to learn how to do this thing with Gatsby. Are you down to like get on a Zoom call and I'll just stream that? And that was Nader Dabit. We were going to deploy Gatsby to the AWS Amplify SDK, and he got on the stream, and it was really like people really liked that format. I was like, okay, I'm on to something here. Let's keep trying this. So that evolved over time, and now I think 265 episodes in, It goes twice a week. It's a very like structured show now versus what it was before with just being a Zoom call. And I have an absolute blast with it. So I think the idea of me being the beginner who learned something with an expert as a guide it really struck a chord with people, because I think a lot of the education that's out there and a lot of the way that people are talked to is as if I am the expert and you are the student, and you should absorb as much knowledge as you can from me. And I still write tutorials and speak from that kind of pedagogical way. But what I learned is I really prefer the community aspect of let's learn this together. And so seeing me ask those beginner questions and struggle through it and, go from an empty folder to, hey, I got this thing running. And you get to watch me have those moments where I get excited or where I get frustrated because it doesn't work. And I think it makes it feel more like you're doing a thing with a community as opposed to being lectured or spoken at.
Yes.
So I think that has, I do think that it played a role in me getting in at Netlify. I think it was what kind of put me on the map in terms of why I was somebody in the candidate pool to begin with. I think that's maybe my biggest contribution to the community in general is Jamstack, or is Learn with Jason. But I think, the other part of it is that I come from, I was trying to pitch the Jamstack before it had a name. I went over to, I was at IBM and trying to get them to switch to a Jamstack approach for building things before there was an option to ship it to Netlify. And, prior to that, I was helping people build these single page apps and feeling the pain of trying to ship to traditional architecture with, these really big, heavy back end rollouts for a front end change. And I was like, there's got to be something better. So for me, what got me to gravitate toward Netlify was that it solidified under the Jamstack umbrella the concept and a workflow that I had been wishing for in my prior roles, and made that into something that I could just have instead of having to go in and configure a bunch of infrastructure and build a bunch of automations and then maintain all of that junk. I was like, no, I don't want to deal with any of that. I just want to build this front end. And so, between Learn with Jason and really wishing that I had that workflow and being a big fan of Netlify in general, I think that's kind of what led me here.
Chris, is that true? Was it Learn with Jason that got him hired, or was it just his exceptional hack game?
I feel like he hired me. I'm his stunt double for anyone that's listening in.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like a great engineer, very much in our space, and preaches the love, right? I mean, like that's what we're all about. We're here to build a better web, and we have perfect alignment, right? And Jason is an excellent human to work with as well, and we collect those, right? So yeah, absolutely, it's been a joy.
That's good.
Absolute joy.
Yeah, and I mean, I know community is massive for Netlify, and I spoke to you back in November when you raised the Series D, if I'm not mistaken, 105 million. Congratulations again, by the way. And we spoke all three of us spoke via Twitter DMs, separately, of course. And community came up, and you wanted to keep that at the forefront of Netlify. And that's I think for obvious reasons, that's a big part of Netlify's history and future, I'm sure. Mm. That said, I mentioned to you back then, and I covered it in an article I wrote, I like to, and this is just, my curiosity, I like to see, how brands grow in the space, what the journey is, how they develop and evolve. And, at some stage, the I won't say the focus, but at some stage, the horizons broaden, right? Let's put it that way. So you can actually, maybe focus more on enterprise projects, enterprise companies, attracting that kind of attention, right? And for me, I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's like, Netlify going to stop caring about the community, the grassroots community. But I do think it's an evolution that should happen or does happen and can happen and maybe is happening at Netlify. And I want to ask you, is that something that you're taking very seriously this year? Is that somewhere where you're going to focus a lot of your energy? What's the deal there?
Well, I mean, so what we're doing here is obviously like supporting building out a standard, right? And that's developer first. But I think it's important to understand, like, gone are the days where you sell Oracle solutions on top of a bunch of developers, right? And it's a C-level decision, and then it's all like, this is the software you have to use, right? I mean, not only are developers influencers, but they're very much also decision makers, right? So I think you sell with developers, even when you're selling enterprise software. And that's also what we're seeing with Netlify, is that it's true, the customer journey often starts with developers sort of kicking the tires on personal projects, and then we grow. They take us to work, and then we grow into these enterprises, right? And we are seeing larger and larger adoption in those enterprises, and especially now when it's been proven that the Jamstack is not for just a certain kind of websites. This is just a better way to build for the web. Now they're starting to, a lot of enterprises are starting to say, okay, so how can we more complete the journey? How can we just say, well, whatever we're building moving forward is going to be on the premises of how you build a modern web, which is a decoupled approach, right? We're using headless CMSs and headless commerce and composable DXPs and like, depending on how you look at it, it has different names, but this is the approach, right? And so how do we, reap the benefits of having common workflows across different projects that used to be siloed? And that's exactly what Netlify does, right? So I think the migration into and up to within enterprises is a very natural one, and one that we just keep growing and keep taking, right? And so, yeah, we're now sitting and powering some huge projects, right? We had Spring moved over 6.5 million e-commerce storefronts to Netlify. If you look at Twilio, I mean, the core product, the very web console in itself is a Netlify app, right? And so it's a bunch of other things they're doing, right? And this is a $60 billion market cap company. So yes, enterprise adoption is very, very real. But for a lot of the same reasons that developers adopt us, right? It is because of these workflows. They give fantastic benefits to productivity, to control, and I think more than anything, time to market.
Yeah, I think if, to build on what Chris is saying, as we expand as a company, our goal isn't for us to grow, start trying to extract dollars out of individual developers, right? What we want to do is help individual developers discover these really powerful workflows. And when they go to work, when their companies start using these workflows, that's where we start to have what we'd call a fair exchange of value. We're going to help you save hours, time, money, infrastructure costs, all of those things. And then, that's where we start to charge. So I think there's a kind of dual evolution here, because for all the reasons Chris said, we want developers to be happy, but there's another side of it too, which is that for companies, especially in today's market where developers don't stay at companies if they don't want to be there. It is so easy to get a new job if you want to go somewhere else. It is so critical for companies to stay you have to have a competitive working environment. You've got to have a stack people want to work on. You got to have workflows that aren't frustrating and developers that are able to be productive instead of burning all their time on admin meta work, toil and drudgery. So part of what we're really seeing is that the major advantage of Netlify is this workflow. We eliminate a lot of toil and drudgery that happens in large teams. And for us, individual developers we're always going to be focused on them for all the reasons that Chris mentioned. But where we're really seeing an opportunity is, these enterprise companies are starting to hit the level where if they're on these legacy stacks, if they're on these frustrating development processes, they're going to lose talent. So if you want to get the best talent, if you want to retain the talent you have, you've got to be looking at these modern web practices, and Netlify is building the best workflow for the modern web. That is our goal.
Yeah.
So that's why we see this expansion happening, and why, kind of why our heads are looking in that direction is we want to make it just as fun to be a developer on a big team as it is to be a developer on your own on a side project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. I'm gonna push back now. So because I was talking to and I'll tell you why. I was talking to somebody from a headless CMS company, a headless CMS vendor, and they were telling me how Jamstack is amazing. They love the idea of Jamstack, and Jamstack is great for a lot of different use cases, but they were unsure I'll put it that way. We're unsure about Jamstack's viability for larger companies, enterprise companies, right? And now, before I continue, myself, I'm not on either side of the fence here. Imagine me, I'm in the house overlooking the fence. I'm not actually on either side of the fence. I just like to see where these conversations go. So he said, with a Jamstack in a larger company, what can happen is you become the company becomes very reliant on its dev and engineering team. They build something relatively bespoke, relatively unique, maybe using frameworks that, not everybody loves or not everybody has experience with. They build something great and they move, right? Devs move, team moves, individuals move, key members of the team move. And now down that brand has to, sort of scramble to find somebody who can come in relatively quickly. Do they know this stack that they've built, all that kind of stuff? That was their concern, right? And, just general costs that can build from that. What's your take on that? And what's your take on that?
Well, I think on the contrary, right? First of all, you can do that it has nothing to do with the Jamstack, right? I mean, you can choose a monolithic stack as well, and then you pay the price in so many ways, and it's proprietary, right? And if you don't have the developers that can do it, you're out of luck. And because it's a complete solution, right? It's going to be a lot harder to find someone there than find developers that know how React works, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think for once, I don't think that's unique to the Jamstack, right? And secondly, I would say, if you look at the monolithic stack, especially with large enterprises, unfortunately, what happens is when you choose a DXP, you're doing it for all the right reasons, right? You want one point of access, right? You want, an easy solution that just works. And the reality just, however, is, practicality doesn't. You need something changed. Well, it'll take a lot of resources, both monetary, right, but also in time, right? I mean, we're just working on a client that we're moving over and they're using a very large known DXP without going into details. And unfortunately, the marketing time, once they're ready to push the button, there's a 32-day lead before they can actually go into production. And that is completely normal. Another thing is also that these big monoliths are so hard to use, so pain in the butt, so much of a pain in the butt, right? That I'm choosing my language here, but it had a lot of quotes to choose from clients, right? But that they actually have to have these huge consultancy firms, right? And if you look at the investments, which are very substantial, they're still only 10% of what they have to pay them to just make it work, right? And so, and I think what's most painful right now is that if you want to stay competitive, as more and more people and companies are moving to a decoupled approach, then your time to market just becomes essential, right? And right now, you're sitting with these hugely complex solutions where the decision makers becomes an IT admin, right, of AEM or whatever it might be. And that is something that you just cannot survive. You cannot stay competitive. Those decisions should be made by product and marketing. And more companies are at C-level finding that out, right? And that's not possible and viable in the old world. And so, on the contrary, I actually think that you're much more flexible, which is proven in how much faster you come to, your time to market becomes if you're using a decoupled approach, right? And then there's the other thing is, the last thing is that the Jamstack is decoupled, right? So you can mix and match services. And so the lock-in there is a lot smaller. And if you want to sort of get off one part of the product because you might have made something yourself, or there might be a competitive offering that just didn't exist when you made the original decision, you can do that now. However, had you been in a traditional monolith, then you might have invested tens of millions of dollars, right, and 7 years into it, and you're completely locked down. And that's what's become. It was always painful, but now there's an alternative, and you just cannot afford to do that anymore, right? And that's actually, I think, why what I'm seeing in my conversations is that the biggest enterprises are the ones most eager to leave and move on to
I think to address the feedback that if you get using the Jamstack, you get something that's a bespoke stack. I think that you can overcomplicate anything. Like if you don't have thoughtful conversations with the way that you build your software, it doesn't matter what stack you're using, you'll end up with something that's unmaintainable going forward. So I do think that is a risk in any web team. I don't think it's a unique risk to the Jamstack. Mm-hmm. But I think that, talking about an extension of some of the benefits Chris just listed, One of the things that I would push back on is saying that you won't be able to find experts in that stack. When you build in a decoupled way, first, you have significantly lower risk area. Like if you build out everything as an independent service, then if you are pulling your shop from, say, Shopify, and you're pulling your blog from WordPress, and you're pulling your whatever other data from another third-party API, and you build the front end in React, if all of your front end devs leave, you don't have to find, say you're using monolithic WordPress, you don't have to find WordPress devs. You just need somebody who can build in React. And there is a huge pool of available React developers right now, versus a significantly smaller, highly specialized pool of monolithic specialists. Mm-hmm. And I think the other trade-off too is what Chris is talking about with this lock-in. Like, I would always counsel a team against building a ton of heavy customization in-house. There's probably a tool that does a lot of what you need for you. But if you go all in on one of these monolithic DXPs and you need a feature, it's really difficult to build in-house. So you're typically kind of stuck on their feature request queue and, hoping that your company has a big enough contract that you can influence their roadmap. And if you do decide to migrate off, you have to throw out your whole stack. And the nice thing about this is if you're on Jamstack and you have, WordPress and Shopify and a React front end, you decide you're going to switch to Sanity for your blog, you get to keep Shopify and your React front end. You only have to migrate out the blog piece. And we just did that on Netlify. We were able to keep all of the front end together, but we swapped out our CMS for the blog only, not the rest of the site. And we were able to do that really seamlessly because it's decoupled and it wasn't a burn the whole house down and start from scratch kind of thing. And we did it with the same set of engineers who built the original one, and a few new ones who came into the new stack, and they were able to pick it up and run. So I think it's a little bit of I think that might be more of a fear than a fact. Yeah. I would say that you're much more likely to have an easier time bringing in new devs on a decoupled stack.
Yeah, and the very last part of that would just be also just by default, right? What Netlify's mission is also taking as much operation as possible and turning it into code, right? And so there's so many things that you're gonna need, not just in prepping for launch, but after launch, as you go along, right, throughout the lifetime of a site that needs maintenance, right, and it needs configuration of caching, and it needs very specialized people, and if they're not there, you're pretty screwed. and all of that operation is actually taken away by this approach and running on something like Netlify, right? And so I would say that there's a lot of those specialities, right? Yeah. That just because you don't need to maintain that kind of operation just goes away altogether.
Okay, so, there's a good answer.
I think it's very much a fear.
Fine. I mean, those are great answers.
Very much not a fact. Well, I mean, of course, you're asking me, right? So what am I going to say? But that's very much that's what we see. But it's also what's being read back to us, right? When we talk with clients that have been with us for 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? Those are the kinds of things that they're talking about. Their flexibility, right? And the time to market, the lack of lock-in, the idea that they can come around things like, we lost this person, right? Or this specialty or something much quicker than before, right? And also the web developers, let's remember in the old world, a front-end developer cut out Photoshop file and turn it into HTML, right? Yeah. And in the new world, they're full-fledged web developers. They can do so many more things, right? So the traditional structure had a lot more specialties that needed to be in place, right? Which makes you a lot more vulnerable as well.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. It's not often I get to speak to companies who interact with so many different headless CMS vendors, right? We mentioned a few times in there, monoliths, enterprises moving away from monoliths. I speak to a lot of headless CMS companies, and they've all told me over the last couple of years in different ways how much they're seeing larger enterprise companies moving away from those legacy suite monolith type platforms and towards more headless, decoupled, API first platforms. I've heard it from individual vendors time and time again, but I want to ask you as well, how try and paint me a picture, just how much of a trend is this? I'll leave it like that.
It's an absolute mega trend. It's huge. We when Matt and I started out Netlify, right? We even made an open source Netlify Git based CMS because we felt like, hey, this standard is going to need that, right? And then very quickly we saw, hey, there's no need to put a lot of effort in this because the reality is that the market is exploding. And at this point, I mean, there's hundreds of headless CMSs out there. But also, if you look at the existing players, they've all sort of had that as the first priority, that we need to be headless. Like, we need to be able to cater this. Because otherwise, we're just going to grow obsolete. So I think that at this point, it's a mega trend. It's definitely, it's gone through a niche. It's in the growth phase. Very quickly, it's going towards maturing. You also see, like, monoliths like traditional monoliths like WordPress, for example, right? There's more and more WordPress developers using the headless version, right? And we see a lot of that on Netlify. Tons of headless WordPress usage on Netlify. So it's not just the new startups, right? It's very much also the existing players. Yes, I would say headless is here to stay.
I think the strongest validation is the fact that we are seeing the companies that have, I would say, a vested interest in remaining monolithic, like WordPress, where a lot of their revenue is driven by hosted WordPress, right? That they are still investing heavily in headless. They are making their APIs really good. They're putting money behind what a decoupled WordPress looks like. We're seeing players like Drupal invest heavily, like full events around decoupled Drupal. We're even seeing companies that I never thought would do it, like Magento has headless. If it's not done, it's on their roadmap. Like there's so much happening in this space that even the people that you would have thought under no circumstances are these are monolithic companies, that's their whole business model. They're going in on this. So I think the writing's on the wall that it's not an option. It's something that you're going to run into. And I think the end of the day, it's because these monolithic tools are built to be extraordinarily good at one thing. WordPress is arguably the best content management admin interface in the world. It's so good at managing content. If you try to shoehorn a forum into it, it becomes less fun. If you try to shoehorn e-commerce into it, sometimes it works, sometimes it's really hard to use. But Shopify is like a world-class e-commerce platform that I probably don't want to run my blog through. So we want to be able to use these tools. They are the best in class for the thing that they were designed to do. And trying to get companies to go all in on a monolithic solution that only solves a small slice of their business needs is, I just don't think that the market's going to accept that anymore. We're not seeing companies willing to make those trade-offs and say, it's okay, we'll have a really bad blog editing experience because we really need this e-commerce experience. They're like, I want both. I'm going to use WordPress for my blog and Shopify for my thing, or I want Contentful for my site management and, BigCommerce for my e-com, or, we're going to use Stripe for the way that we accept payments, and we're going to use Sanity.io for they just get to choose the thing that meets their business needs and that suits their team properly without having to make those trade-offs of like who suffers here. I think, we had to make those trade-offs when in previous editions where you had whoever the leadership in the company was, they had their affinity. The leader came up as a marketer. Well, you're probably getting a really marketing friendly DXP, and the developers just have to deal with the outcome of that. You get a company that's driven by developers. Okay, well, now the whole marketing team has GitHub accounts and they're having to figure out how Markdown and PRs work, and they're not happy about that. We don't have to make those trade-offs anymore. And I think that's maybe the most exciting aspect of this this decoupled world, is that the marketers get the tool they want. The developers get an API. They get to build with the tools they want. And every team gets to pick a tool that suits their needs instead of, basically letting whoever the highest paid person in the room is make a decision on the monolithic platform, and everybody else just has to live with that decision.
Yeah, those are very good points. I was going to mention another large monolithic vendor who is also sort of, I won't mention their name, but everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say this. I think they're sort of deconstructing themselves to remake themselves as an API first Mac. They're going hard on the Mac stuff, and I think that's more again validation that this whole trend and the mega trend is definitely here to stay. And on that point, the Mac thing, what's Netlify's take on Mac? Because I always make sure that there's no sort of a bit of pushback in a company, because the pushback on Jamstack that I was telling you about is actually from a surprising source, a headless CMS vendor, right? So sometimes I ask these questions, and I think, oh, right, they've actually got a reservation about this particular trend. Is there any reservations you guys have about Mac, Composable, DXP, anything like that? Maybe just definitions, anything, or is it all just like, no, this is great?
No, I mean, like
we're talking about the Mac Alliance, is that right?
Let's talk about Mac Alliance first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Netlify is a member of it. So I'm not sure if you know, but we're the primary enabler in that category, right? And so Mac Alliance is another name for it, right? But it's the same movement, right? And so the architecture that the Mac Alliance exists upon is the Jamstack, right, underneath it. And Netlify is the perfect enabler for them, right? Like we've really geared to be the conduit of Mac solutions. And so we have a lot of companies, agencies, enterprises that are coming in with the mindset of, hey, we're adopting a Mac approach, right? And so Netlify is the obvious choice for us to do so, right? As far as implementing a common workflow for the developers for it. So yeah, I mean, I think Mac, but it's the same. Like you'll when you come to DXPs, we're talking about composable, right? That's a Gartner terminology there, right? And you look at headless e-commerce and headless CMSs and so on, right? The idea is we're moving off the old ARM monolith that had to dictate everything, that was insecure, that was didn't scale very well, right? And that would lead to ways off the web, right? Which isn't in the interest of people, most people, right? And that's why I'm super excited about it. It doesn't very much matter what you call it, right? The movement is the same. Right, we're decoupling the web layer from the business logic and the backend, and that opens so many wonderful doors, as Jason was just talking about as well, right?
Absolutely. So I want to wrap this up with one final question for the both of you. If there was one thing you could change about the headless CMS space right now, what would that thing be?
Well, I mean, so what I'm seeing that I'm very excited about is composable DXPs, right? It's these digital suites that a lot of companies have invested in, but they're paying a quite horrific price right now, right? As far as the workflows go for it and the functionality, the site performance, right? And there's a way off that by making it composable, right? But you have to respect and understand why these companies chose a DXP to begin with. Right. And I think that we weren't mature as an ecosystem enough previously to really go and cater that, right? To give them the experience that they were paying for essentially, right? When they chose the DXP. And now I see we are, right? When Netlify, in combination with partners as well, can come in and really provide that orchestration layer. So now we're coming into an age where you can have a composable DXP, where you choose instead of having the CMS essentially dictate the entire suite, right? Now becomes a great content API. It still has all the fine-grained access control and all the other things you need as an enterprise with tons of different functionality, right? But you can now plug it in, with the super professional analytics suite, right? That you bought from elsewhere and your headless e-commerce solutions and just for the same reasons that we talked about for any other projects, right? But the consolidated feel, the feeling that you're using one suite, that everything really communicates well to each other and feeds each other in the right way, with data traveling freely across these different individual parts of your solution. That's what was needed to really provide an enterprise-grade level DXP, right, which used to be called CMS, right? But then we added on and we made it more of a broader suite, right? So you asked about headless CMS and to me, what I'm just incredibly excited about is that, right, and that we're now able to provide that solution. So if it's like something I'm missing, I'm just saying like that road, and we keep it like every day. It's a better experience for enterprise clients, right? And this year, I think we're really going to start seeing companies that aren't DXPs take this approach. Keep what they have, use it as a company in BI, and now getting really safe, scalable, and much, much faster workflows around it. And that's what I'm at Netlify incredibly excited to be able to give to clients now, right? And we're already starting to implement those solutions, and it's pretty amazing. But of course, that's one thing that we're not fully there, but we're getting there very quickly, right?
Cool, very cool. Jason, how about you? Anything you'd change if you could?
I am going to go in such a violently different direction and talk tech here. I really want headless CMSs to standardize and provide better tooling for rich text editing. I think that one of the biggest pain points that we have is that every CMS is using some different flavor of serialization for rich text editors. And then when the front end teams go to implement, they've got different sets of tooling and weirdness that they have to jump through. And they're trying to wire in their custom React components to this custom rich text editor thing, to this other weird serialization format. And it leads to a lot of frustration and a lot of just kind of awkwardness and people half implementing solutions. You don't have time to implement the rich text preview because it took you so much time to do the rich text production implementation. And so you get these kind of half-baked content experiences. And I think that generally hurts the usability of headless CMSs and hurts the speed of adoption, because people are like, well, I want it to look like WordPress does, where they've got this very integrated monolithic experience of what rich text looks like, and they kind of do a lot of things for you. So I think if the headless CMS vendors could standardize around a single rich text format and create a kind of community maintained suite of rich text serializers and deserializers, it would be a giant leap forward for the whole headless industry.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a really good one. And that's a business idea out there.
That's a free business idea for somebody who's looking for a startup.
I'm telling you now, that is a great business idea. If someone to start that, let us free know. We'll try and jump in. That is actually really good. Like a standardized, rich text headless CMSs. If there's widespread adoption of the same thing, I could see that being a massive help.
And I feel like we're close. Like every headless CMS is doing some flavor of this, so we could just all decide to standardize on one format. And it's like, what's the thing that comes after Markdown? That's what we need. Yeah.
Okay. If somebody's going to build that, let us know. But we'll wrap up there. If people want to continue this conversation with you both, what's the best place for them to reach out? Twitter, LinkedIn?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm Jay Lengstorf on there. That's probably the place I'm most active. Or you can catch me on Twitch. I stream twice a week. Learn with Jason.
Yes.
I'm not as avid of Twitter user as Jason is. So I might not be responding as real time. But yeah, ch_Bach, or find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Bach is BACH.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time. Been a pleasure. Hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it.